This podcast is brought to you by Always Possible.
alwayspossible.co.uk.
The sun is out, spring has sprung. I'm in your ears for a little bit, saying hello. What a treat. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Possibility Club podcast. I've got a question. How can innovative partnerships transform global health initiatives? And what role does transparency play when building trust and driving impact in the charity world? Today's episode is going to delve into this and other questions through the lens of Charity Water. Now, Charity Water is known for its transparent and innovative approach, with a dedicated leadership and some very interesting funding models. Some say has revolutionised how charities operate and engage with donors. They operate on what they call a 100% model, where all public donations go directly to funding clean water projects, while it's the private donors that cover operational costs, staffing, infrastructure, overheads, etc. This model ensures that every contribution has a direct impact, which in turn maybe fosters more trust and engagement from donors. What do you think? So my guest today has led the UK arm of Charity Water for years, and she's led it to remarkable heights, focusing on providing clean, safe drinking water to communities in need. And under her guidance, the organisation has implemented projects benefiting over 15 million people worldwide. She's pioneered new funding strategies, including subscription giving, and she's developed partnerships across lots of different sectors, all focused on addressing global challenges effectively. Exploring people's attitudes towards charity funding, my guest emphasises the importance of transparency in operations. She openly shares how funds are used and the real costs of running a charity. This isn't to deny that charities do cost money, but being more transparent about why and how. This approach seems not only to build credibility, but also encourages more consistent and impactful support from the community. Additionally, my guest has roles beyond Charity Water, mentoring women through the Fem Mentored programme and advising the Good Brains for Good People initiative. She also sits on the board for the Costa Foundation, reflecting her dedication to supporting female leadership in the charity sector. I'm Richard Freeman. This is the Possibility Club, and my special guest this episode is Managing Director of Charity Water UK, Hannah Bellamy. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Possibility Club. It's Richard Freeman here with, as always, a far more eloquent, intelligent and lively guest who is giving me the great honour of asking them a few questions and having an interesting chat about their life, work and world. And as ever, we're looking at themes of bravery and governance and impact and what happens when we roll our sleeves up to tackle an issue head on. What does that look like? How do we do it sustainably? How do we scale it? And I've got no better guest, I think, to answer some of those questions than Hannah Bellamy, who is Managing Director of Charity Water UK. So big global movement, but we're going to be talking specifically about the intersectionality between women's health and water. And hopefully we'll shed some light on what happens when we invest in one thing and the ripples that might have on so many other things in a global context. But firstly, before we get into these big topics, Hannah, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Richard. How are you? Did you have a good long weekend?
I did, yeah, very nice. Lots of family things, and the sunshine was here.
Yes.
So much to be grateful for.
Indeed, yeah, no, it was good to see it.
So tell me a little bit about your work and what got you into working with Charity Water and where you are at the moment.
Yeah, of course. So I've been with Charity Water for 6 years, so feels very much a part of my identity at this point. So sometimes I have to really pick back to think how I got here. But there are two main causes that I care deeply about. One of them is around women and women's issues and equality, and what does that look like, not just for us on a day-to-day basis, but really thinking about it around the world. As you mentioned, and we'll talk about, I'm sure water plays a huge role in that for women. And the other one is young children, and about if and how and what does it look like when children are born into circumstances and are disadvantaged throughout life purely because of where they were born or the circumstances they were born into. And that really gets me. So when I've worked on that, that's obviously, again, a huge one with water. Actually not having access to clean water and sanitation is the leading killer of children under 5, which is just gets me in the gut every time I'm a parent. But I've also worked on that in other areas as well. So my previous role was with United Way, and there we were looking at getting books to children who didn't have books at home to help boost their vocabulary from the start. So whatever it is that the child needs to try and give them some kind of level playing field as they start in life. So those are the two things that really, really get to me. I worked on a number of different issues throughout my career, but I didn't know when I began working or even when I was studying that working in charity was an option. I don't remember ever considering it. So I came to it having first worked in publishing. That was my kind of first go at a career. It's difficult and it's also not what you imagine in terms of when you love reading. It's very different when you look at books as a product. So I went from that and I thought, okay, I'll go and work in a corporate environment. If this is a business and books have to profit and loss and everything else, their product, let's look at business and understand that. So I went and worked on a graduate scheme for Centrica, who owned British Gas at the time. They also owned the AA, they owned OneTel. They kind of looked at themselves as the essential services. I worked with them. And within working with them for a few years, I moved into corporate responsibility. So I started to think about, and again, it's not something I'd ever understood. I think when I was growing up, I was born in the 80s, growing up in the 90s, we thought about businesses like the Body Shop, for example, but they were outliers. We didn't necessarily think about other businesses and how they behaved and what that should look like. So it was a whole new world to me. And that's how I got into the charity sector, having worked in that area for a while and meeting some of the charity partners.
So you say you've been with Charity Water for 6 years. I've always thought it as an American organisation, but I know you lead the UK team. So tell me a little bit about how it works and what the sort of genesis is and the funding model and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, of course. And Charity Water was founded in the US. Our coming into being story. So our founder, Scott Harrison, lots of people know his story, even though they don't know the name Charity Water, they've heard his story. So he was a nightclub promoter, really living what he thought of at the time was his best life, but perhaps then started to realize was maybe his worst life, in the sense of lots of drink, drugs, probably a lot of fun, but started to be much less fun over time. So he was a nightclub promoter for 10 years in New York, and he decided to give that up and volunteer, and eventually found himself on a hospital ship in Liberia. And while he was there, he spent 2 years and he started to appreciate why people were coming to this hospital ship in the first place. So not only was the fact that a hospital ship was needed for the first adjustment, there's huge adjustments to looking at different countries and how they operate and things. So needing this hospital ship, and people had walked maybe a month and queued for days to be seen on this hospital ship. And what he started to realize is so many of them were coming with illnesses or other types of situations that came from not having clean water where they were in their villages. So he went back to New York, and being a nightclub promoter originally, and the thing he knew was he threw a party, because that's what he knew how to do. So he threw a party, invited loads of people. He then told them exactly where their money went. And I think this is the difference. So Charity Water was founded with this principle because it was someone who didn't come from the sector, and so didn't come from thinking about the existing framework, thinking about perhaps the existing government funding or grants or different ways that maybe people within the nonprofit sector thinks. He thought, okay, party, money, now I need to show you and give you in this sense, almost a product. Where's that money gone? What's it done? And he also was talking to people who traditionally, he jokes that he spoke to his drug dealer about giving to charity, and he said, well, I've never given to charity. I don't trust charities or where the money goes.
Mm-hmm.
So people who perhaps had never thought about or trusted or believed in charities, he was starting to talk to them and understand that. And I said, that's why he said, okay, well, 100% then, I guarantee you, give me your money, 100% of it will be invested directly in a clean water project, and I'm going to show it to you. And so from the beginning, he took all the money, he separated it out, he used that to build these clean water projects, and then he took photos of them. He sent the GPS coordinates, he told people how many people were using them, where they were exactly, all this type of information. And we've done that ever since. So we've always had this very different model where 100% of funds raised on our website, anyone who gives me £10, whatever it is, that will all be spent within the countries where we're working. We won't do the work ourselves. We'll invest it in local organizations and local people to do the work, and then we will prove that work. So it's a very transparent. We pin every single project on our website. So hundreds of thousands of projects are on our website, and you can see them and know that they exist. And that holds us to account to our donors, but also to the people that we're serving.
This idea of water, the revelation your founder had, but also just how important water is, because I don't really have to think about water, or I haven't had to think about it. It comes out of my taps, it's clean, I can drink it. For many, many years, I've just taken it completely for granted.
Yeah.
Interestingly, though, I think even in the UK in the last few years, and I think in this election that's coming, water quality, for the first time that I can remember, is going to be quite a big issue, whether it's sewage in the sea, whether it's biosystems within rivers. So my thinking, right, if this is happening in the southeast of England and suddenly we're now starting to worry about droughts, we're starting to worry about floods, we're starting to worry about the quality of water, goodness me, what might be happening where there is not anything like the infrastructure and the money. How big a problem do we still have to ensure that everybody has access to clean water?
We're only starting now, like you said, to actually think about water as a resource, as not just something that is there and free flowing, and actually really starting to think of the value that it has. In the countries where we work, that is well known. And so we're working in 22 countries right now. That's not where all of the issues are. Globally, there's 703 million people, so it's about 1 in 10 people, who don't have access to water. And when you think about something like the Thames, that's where they will be getting their water from. Yeah. So if I didn't have the taps here and everything else, I actually live quite close to the Thames. I would walk there, I would take my jerry can, and I would be getting that water. And that's what I would be bringing home for my family to drink, to wash. Where we're working, lots of the sources they're getting from, they are contaminated by human waste. Also, animals will share the water points, etc. So the problem is the 703 million. When Charity Water started, that was 1 billion. So the really positive piece within it, it seems huge. It is huge. It's a massive problem, but we're making progress, and we can make progress. We know how to do it. So I always look at this issue, and it's one of the few problems in the world that I think, first of all, we can all agree on. So we can look at it and say, at the extremes of everyone still agrees that every human should have access to clean and safe drinking water. So it's great that it can unite people, and we know how to fix it. So we can really rally people, is my hope. So it's a huge problem. We do know how to fix it, and we can. The added complication to any of that just is climate change. Climate change is actually all about water. It's a drought, it's a flood, it's too much, it's too little. And obviously, when there's a drought, what we need to ensure is that any infrastructure can withstand that and isn't contributing towards it. It's not the communities and villages we're working in getting access to water that's going to deplete a water table. So they're not driving it. They need to, but we do need to drill deep enough to ensure that they have access to it. And then the other side of it is, during times of flood, you also need to be extremely aware of the infrastructure for water, because it can become contaminated if you don't. There's so many different ways of looking at it and thinking about it. And the more we start to realize the value of water, like we said, but also the complexities and the robustness of the systems that you need to fix it, we can and we will make progress. And actually, it's something that we always say we want to bring clean water to every person on the planet within our lifetime. And we should be able to do that. That's something we can do. And wouldn't that be amazing? It surely would. And, if we don't get this water situation right, the consequences are enormous. Clean water and sanitation has its own. We have our own sustainable development goal, number 6, clean water and sanitation for all. But actually, it impacts 8 goals. So if you look at access to clean water, it impacts hunger, it impacts poverty, it impacts education, it impacts gender equity, and the list really goes on. And it's because it's just such a fundamental need. And then with women and girls, the issue is that when a home and a family don't have clean water, the majority of the time, the people having to go and collect water usually from a dirty source and having to walk an awful, long distance. It's the women and girls. I've met women, I've traveled to some of these communities in Ethiopia and Uganda and talked to them about what this is like for them. It's really hard work. So often if you think they've probably got quite thin flip-flops on. So they're then taking usually a jerry can or some other kind of vessel, a 20-litre jerry can that you would use to collect petrol normally. And then they're walking on not properly designed paths, so they're very uneven, very uncomfortable, can be very dusty and dry in certain seasons, very muddy in other seasons, incredibly long distances, then bending down, and it's back-breaking work to collect the water, whether it's from an open source pond, or sometimes people are actually digging down. There are wells, but very extremely old wells where people are pulling water up, and it's actually really dangerous because they're not protected and people can fall in. Collecting that water and then taking it home again. And it's really heavy. And the piece that I didn't say within this is they usually have to queue even to access these things. So they could spend a huge amount of time waiting just to get the water.
This is an Always Possible podcast, but making podcasts is really only one way in which we help people drive forward economic development and social innovation. We're Sussex born and bred, but work across the UK and sometimes further to design and deliver big projects that promote social mobility, digital transformation and equality of opportunity in business, culture and education. Projects that tell the story of growth and creative thinking in cities, sectors and communities. Projects that enable emerging leaders as well as big brands to define, measure and communicate their impact. We work with teams who know that their mission is a bit braver and a bit more ambitious than others. If that sounds like you, then we need to meet. Come say hello at alwayspossible.co.uk. That's alwayspossible.co.uk.
This city.
This is a quick note to say that the Brighton Paradox will be back. Season 2 will be a shorter, tighter series looking at the energy, impatience and opportunity happening in post-pandemic Brighton and Hove. We're examining the landscape across the city in 2024, what's changing, what's building in economics, culture, community and technology. Why are people telling me that they are in fight or flight mode? What is the significance of a council with an overall majority? How is artificial intelligence maybe changing the way people solve problems in the city? And of course, how has a podcast changed the lives of Brighton's children? And it's not this one. All new interviewees and all new explorations of the city. But right now we're still gluing the jigsaw together, so you'll have to wait a little bit longer. But we are delighted to announce that we're being supported again by Brighton and Hove Albion Football Club, who return as brilliant headline sponsors and partners. And the University of Brighton's Help to Grow management programme also returns as a really valuable project partner. And in addition, we have 2 new supporters, the exceptional folk at EQ Investors and the legends at Midnight Communications, and we couldn't do this without all of these visionary people. Brilliant. Thank you. Take care. Speak soon.
Then they get the water, they fill it up, walk back home again. That's multiple times a day these women have to do these trips. So it is about, the health and everything else. It's also about the time and the opportunity, because those women, what we find, we have amazing examples of women in communities where we bring clean water and you talk to them about what's life like now. And the first thing, I think, there's a woman called Helen. Our team met Helen and they said to her, Helen, she lived in Uganda, what's life like now? What's the biggest difference? And she said, I'm beautiful. I said, well, yeah, no, Helen, you are beautiful. Yeah, but what's the difference? And she was saying, no, I'm beautiful because she could wash, and she could wash herself and her clothes. And what she was saying is before, she wouldn't wash herself and her clothes because she'd prioritize her family and her children. So water was so precious, she never got to that. So that was the first thing. So there's just a level of basic dignity within that. And then you talk to women and say, well, what do you do now with your time? What's different? How are you doing it? Nobody is wasting that time. We have women who have set up restaurants, hairdressers. They're making pots out of clay and selling the market. They're making bricks. They're physically building things. I mean, the time that they then get back in their day is invested back into their families, back into their local communities, and into building businesses which bring more wealth to their communities. So it's the first step. out of poverty. It really is. And it's women and girls who are affected by that predominantly, because otherwise they're held back.
What I like about what you're doing and so many others now, there's this kind of simplicity to it will help this, this, and this, and this. It's not get confused or distracted.
Yeah. And it's something you have to, and we often have those conversations with people, because once you're talking to a community, and especially if we go with people and we visit some of these communities, they'll look at it and say, okay, but now the school, because we do bring clean water to schools, but it's a real issue as well, clean water and toilets and hand washing. And they'll say, the school doesn't have enough books, so now we need a library. Or, okay, great, we've got this community clean water. Now can we talk about, one thing I didn't talk about when we're talking about clean water and women is that when you don't have access to clean water, that drives increased levels of domestic violence. So it's a really complicated piece that I hadn't fully understood until I sat down with a community. And we visited with some donors, really rural, up all these, unmade roads. We traveled for hours and hours to access some of these communities and chat with them. And we separated out the men and the women. So I and some other women spoke with the women in the community, and the men sat somewhere else. The men sat on chairs, by the way, the women sat on the ground, but never mind, that's what we did. So we all sat there and we had this great chat. And what came out was, for them, having clean water, one woman sort of put her hand up and said that what has changed for me is my husband doesn't beat me anymore. And the women all nodded, and it was very much a fact. And it's because she wasn't having to queue for the water. She wasn't having to spend as much time. He wasn't wondering where she was. The cooking had been done, everything else. So it relieved a certain amount of tension in the home. Now, I hear that. I look at these women and their children and everything else, and I think I'm really glad that clean water has relieved some of that domestic violence. But I really want to do more. How do we talk about this? What's the cultural change that needs to happen here? What's the domestic violence intervention? But I have to remember and be really clear, that's not my job.
Yeah.
That's not our job. We speak with our local partners about what things are there. We hope they're doing something. But if we get distracted by things that really, again, they get you in the gut and they really want to do something about it. But if we get distracted, then we won't go on to the next community and bring them clean water and relieve some of it for someone else to come and do the other piece. And so it's really hard.
And suddenly you're then a domestic violence charity. Suddenly then you're looking at gender equality, and then it does become unworkable, and then there's the risk of the sort of one culture trying to save another culture, rather than
but that's not my job.
Always possible, which is the consultancy I run. We've just done some work with a charity in Ghana, and a similar sort of thing. The real challenge is that young women are not going to school, and they are at risk in their homes because they are not at school for all sorts of reasons, falling out of opportunity. What the charity I'm working with was working with trying to build libraries. It was trying to work with transport, and none of this was quite working until they cottoned on to the one thing that they could do simply and at scale was to supply sanitary products. And there were cultural reasons behind that. There were hygiene reasons. There were safety reasons. And there just was not a culture of free access to sanitary products and no education. They focused on that one thing. And thousands and thousands of girls now feel able to go to school all of the time now. It's changing the way science and health and reproduction and biology is taught within the schools. There's different understandings about it at home. Mad, isn't it? And we take that for such granted. What's that one thing?
How do you find that one thing? And it's not a bad impulse to want to do more. It's a good impulse. But in a business context, that's not that you can't do that. And actually, as a charity, it's very similar. You have what are you doing and what you're doing really well, and how do you do more of that rather than getting distracted by the next.
And I think it's a really interesting time at the moment. You gave the example of the body shop being an outlier, but we're in this sort of creative tussle between what's the purpose of business at the moment. And I think it's both exciting and frustrating when we think about the huge power for change that businesses can have with their access to skills, talent, resources, capital, but also, we are in tough economic times. So the impulse just to drive shareholder value, which has been the model, tends to take over. So I'm interested that your charity has been, it's got a lot of people that come from a business background in it. The model you said is quite different because that's sort of governance and transparency first. So where, and you've talked about how that works in terms of communicating transparency. But I'm interested in, how does it work in other ways in terms of that mission driven discipline, the sort of
Yeah.
financial discipline, I guess, the ability to market a product, even if that product is not trying to, sell to the rich, actually, it's trying
Yeah.
to enable empowerment in other ways. But also, what are some of the challenges? Is there space for the innovation and risk taking that corporates will put money into? That whereas charities get frowned upon a little bit. Talk me through a little bit about what you've learned with your background in that space.
It's extremely freeing because if I'm fundraising, I know I'm not fundraising for my salary, right? So if I'm asking someone to do a fundraiser or run a challenge or anything else, and that's not to say when people are, and I have done in the past, that that's a bad thing. It's just different and it's freeing and it makes it more comfortable. The difficulty is that it's really hard to scale. We have done since the beginning, these two different bank accounts. When I'm speaking generally to the public, I'm fundraising into that clean water bank account. So I'm saying, if you give to me 100% of the money and I'm going to show you, and that's fantastic. But I could get to a point where I have, you're raising millions there, but if you've got nothing in the other side of it, I can't spend it. You need the really good programmatic people who understand and who do all the due diligence needed on your local partners. We don't ever dictate what the solution should be. We want the local partners to tell us that, but you need people who can definitely understand that and also play a role in helping match up those partners. So you're doing pipe systems brilliantly. You should speak to our partner here who's trying to learn about it, and real experts who've come from working for governments and in academia and everything else are amazing on that side, on the programmatic side. That's what you want, the people who can really look at that and understand it. And then you also want people on the fundraising and the marketing side who know how to reach the most people possible with the raise, so it's done efficiently. So you need all of that, and and innovation is one of our values. We really want to be able to innovate. The nice thing is, because our 100% model, we have the freedom to do that without explaining to people who go into the water and having to justify and say, oh, well, actually, it's good we spent your money on innovating and fundraising or marketing over here because that £1 has generated 4 more pounds, which is the truth. And I think that's the important thing, is people should know, if you're going to a charity and they don't have a 100% model, which most don't, the money that's going into the running of the charity should be seen as an investment in the opportunity to scale that charity, not a separate. But because we don't have that, it's not distracting. We can get on with it. And we have these about 130 families who fund our operations, and we talk to them like investors. In many of the countries we work, clean water projects are delivered, something's not quite right, or they were done well in the first place, but something's gone wrong and they're no longer working. For us, that's just not okay. Remember, again, we're pinning them on our map, so we can't have these not working. So we've developed these sensors, but this is a whole new piece of kit. It needed to have battery life of about 10 years. It needed to obviously be waterproof. It needed to work in extremely hot temperatures. It needed to be able to transmit data accurately to the cloud and all these other things. So it required an awful lot of R&D, and still is requiring R&D. So for something like that, we got a grant from Google to say, we have this idea, we know it's needed, can you help us? So they gave us an initial grant. We've got to a certain point, and now we're speaking to some of our other donors. And again, we're saying, would you give to us so that we can scale this out, so we can pilot it here, we can pilot it there. But the main thing is, again, everyone knows where the money's going. It's going into this very specific project, and we'll share with them what's the progress. Where are we now? Now it's okay. Now we've rolled out to a new country. Now we're trying it out on other people's water points now. So it's all about, for us, just keeping it and reporting back to people and telling them and being really clear. And we do ask our auditors, we pay an additional fee to our auditors to audit our 100% model, which obviously they don't have to do because charities don't have to do it, but we pay them an additional fee to look at it.
And we need to update our technology, and we need to, be in a space where things work.
Yeah.
You guys have done a really great job in talking about the work that you do, but I can also see there's quite a lot there about, how charities can work, your model known about, what sort of conversation do you think we should be having around charity governance and funding models?
It's looking at it as the investment piece and thinking to people about, if they want their maximum impact, what does that look like? there's a piece on the news just this morning about the NHS and the computer systems being so bad. And that's just a real example of when you don't invest in a system, the waste that then happens. And it's the same with charity sectors. And I think we do have to talk about, if you, and this, I always, it is always that thing, is if you give me £1, I know you want it to go to, so for example, as a homeless charity, you want me to feed somebody or help them receive shelter or something else. I could just do that. I could buy a, whatever meal £1 would buy, but some sort of food item. Or I could take that £1 and I could invest it in, whether it's marketing or new software or something else, but know that that was going to generate £5 more. And with that £5 more, I can take £4 and put it back into buying the food, and the next pound generate another £5. And if we start looking at it, and we always look at it in that space, then we will. But the issue is, it's so hard to get people's attention anyway, and to have a nuanced conversation. And that's what this requires, is you get through all these different conversations, and then, is it food, is it shelter, is it long-term, is it mental health support, is it whatever it is. And so I think the thing is, there's so much, like we were talking about, when you want to do good or have impact, you can get distracted. There's that piece as well. And I don't know how we as organisations, I do think it starts at an institutional level in terms of the government, the charity commission, the other umbrella type organisations and the corporates. If they started to talk in a positive way and they started to understand, I think it would really help us to shift things. But at the moment, it's individual charities.
Yeah.
And I work with a whole load of corporates, and the majority of them, they love our 100% model because they can report back out again on their own impact in terms of generating clean water, which is fantastic. And I want them to do that, but they're not paying for us.
Yeah.
Right. For the computer that's being used to do this, or the software or anything else.
The media have a big role as well, don't they? I mean,
yes. Yeah. No, and I spoke to third sector press, third sector news, and I said, how do I talk about some of the innovation stuff? How do I get? And I was told by a journalist who worked in it that unless it's, the thing that they get most attention for is a scandal. So even within our own industry press, they're not that interested in a good news story unless it's sensational in some way. Really, they want something that shows. So even people who should be on our side, I find it really frustrating. I'm like, but you should be the ones who are trying to help us do this. But even your stories, you're looking for the rogue board member who's, had a conflict of interest. You're looking for a kids company style scenario, and we all know that now people reflect on that, and that was managed very poorly. And that's the issue, is even within ourselves we're doing that.
World Water Day is quite a big deal, and I know you're doing a lot of work around that. How can people, if they've been listening to this or they've been following your work, think, I need to not take water for granted, I need to think about this, I didn't realize, yes, it's a great that it's gone from 1 billion to 700 million, but it's still 700 million people. What can I do? Where can people start, even if it's something small?
Go to charitywater.org, sign up for our newsletter, give. And I always say to people, if you give whatever you can, the beauty in the 100% model is, we're going to spend it. So do give. And I always say to people, you can give even just a small amount every month. Sign up to give a small amount every month rather than giving one-off big donations, because it gives an organisation predictability. So do that. We call it the spring, everybody who gives every single month. And we try and share with them, like trying to end on a positive note here, we try to share good news all the time with them. So what's the good news that's happened because you're doing this and believing in this movement? So that's what I would say. And I would also say, if for any reason clean water isn't your thing, I think it should be, because it impacts so many other areas, and it's mine, obviously. But find the thing, and I think obviously people listen to your podcast, they'll have the thing they do care about and give to that. And I think it is important that, as much as everything else, commit to give what you can. I think everybody should be.
Lovely. Been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much, Hannah Bellamy, for being in the Possibility Club this week.
Thank you, Richard. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Possibility Club, Practical Bravery. If you enjoyed this episode, do like, share, review, tell everybody about it. Look in the show notes for all the details of today's guest, stuff we talked about, stuff that's of interest, new things to read, new things to listen to. And if you are running a business or a charity and you are trying to accelerate or improve the impact that you have in the world, if you want to be famous for what you do and what you change rather than just what you sell, then talk to us. alwayspossible.co.uk. We want to hear from you, we want to talk to you, we want to amplify and elevate your ideas, and who knows, we might be able to help you feel more confident and clear about what's next. alwayspossible.co.uk. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new special guest and a new insight on practical bravery in action.
The Possibility Club is an Always Possible podcast. The interviewer was Richard Freeman for Always Possible, and the producer and editor was me, Chris Thorpe Tracy, for Lo-Fi Arts. Have a good week.
alwayspossible.co.uk.
Lo-Fi Arts.